at evening is the Lord's Passover. Because God's days are from evening to evening, even the 7-day Sabbath. It starts Friday evening and it goes until Saturday evening. He said the 14th day of the first month at evening is the Lord's Passover, followed by what?
And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread.
Go ahead.
The Lord. 7 days ye must eat unleavened bread.
Again, these are God's holy days. And they're to be acknowledged at their set time. Drop down to verse number 15 and go ahead. We're going to look at another.
And ye shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that ye brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete.
So you're going to have 7 weeks. Go ahead. Plus what?
Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall ye number 50 days.
So you're going to have 7 weeks and 1 day. This is known as the Feast of Weeks. And it's simply, or in the New Testament, it's referred to as the Pentecost. And Pentecost simply means 50. Go ahead.
And ye shall offer a new meat offering unto the Lord.
Turn over to Matthew, the 28th chapter. Because we're going to see what did the early Christians do. And that is that they obeyed God's commandments. Because to be a Christian simply means to be Christ-like. 28 and verse number 1. And go ahead, read that one verse. Because we're going to see when the Sabbath is.
In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week.
So the Sabbath is still, the last day of the week is still the 7th day. It says in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week. Go ahead.
Came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre.
Turn over to Acts, the 13th chapter. Because we're going to see that Paul, who was an apostle to the Gentiles, he observed God's commandments, as well as did the early Christians. 13, and pick it up at verse number 13. Go ahead when you get there.
Now when Paul and his company loosed from Paphos, they came to Perga and Pamphylia. And John departing from them returned to Jerusalem.
Go ahead.
But when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia.
And what did they do?
And went into the synagogue on the 7th day and sat down.
And they did that. Why? Because we read in Leviticus, you're to have a holy convocation on God's Sabbath, which is the 7th day. It says they went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and they sat down. Drop down to verse number 42 and go ahead.
And when the Jews were gone out of the synagogue,
what did the Gentiles do?
The Gentiles besought that these words might be preached to them the next Sabbath.
They understood when God's Sabbath was. It said when the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, it said the Gentiles, they begged them that these words might be preached to them the next Sabbath. Go ahead.
Now when the congregation was broken up, many of the Jews and religious proselytes followed Paul and Barnabas, who, speaking to them, persuaded them to continue in the grace of God.
Go ahead.
And the next Sabbath day came almost the whole city together to hear the word of God.
And notice it say, and the next Sabbath day, they came together. Why? Because they were instructed, they were commanded that to have a holy convocation on the 7th day. It said the next Sabbath day came almost the whole city together to hear the word of God. Turn over to Luke, the 4th chapter. Because again, to be a Christian means to be Christ-like. We're to follow the example that Jesus set. And we're going to see that Jesus kept the commandments that was given unto Israel. Luke 4 and verse number 14. Go ahead when you get there.
And Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit into Galilee. And there went out a fame of him through all the region round about.
Because the news of Jesus began to spread because of the miracles that he was doing. But go ahead.
And he taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was.
He said he came to Nazareth. First he said he taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. He said he came to Nazareth. He said where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, as his manner of living was, what did he do?
He went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day.
Go ahead.
And stood up for to read.
He went into the synagogue when? On the Sabbath day, the 7th day of the week, God's Sabbath, because he was commanded to do so. So Jesus, Paul, the apostles, the disciples, the early Christians, the Gentiles, if you will, everybody kept God's weekly Sabbath. But now turn over to Acts, the 20th chapter. Because we're going to see that Paul kept all of God's holy days as he was commanded to. Acts 20. And we're going to pick it up at verse number 6. Because the people that now observe Sunday as being the Christian Sabbath, they like to use this verse here to substantiate that. But go ahead.
And we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread.
And why is that? Because they had to keep the feast of unleavened bread. Because it was commanded of them to do so. He said, we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. Go ahead.
And came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days.
Again, they kept the feast of unleavened bread as commanded. Go ahead.
And upon the first day of the week.
And again, what did it say? It didn't say upon the Sabbath. It said upon the first day of the week. The Sabbath is still the Sabbath. When what?
When the disciples came together to break bread.
Go ahead.
Paul preached unto them.
And see, people like to say, we see the Sabbath change. No, all it said was upon the first day of the week. The first day of the week is what? Sunday. It said the disciples came together and they broke bread. They simply ate. And while they were doing so, Paul preached unto them. If you preach to somebody, does not matter on what day you do it. If you sitting around eating, that does not in any way have anything to do with the changing of God's Sabbath. God commanded concretely that we were to observe the 7th day as his Sabbath. We were to have a holy convocation on that day. Go ahead.
Ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight.
Drop down to verse number 16. What else did Paul do? Go ahead.
But Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus.
In his travels, what is he doing?
Because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted.
Because he was in a hurry, and why?
If it were possible for him to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost.
Because Paul was going to observe the Pentecost as commanded in Leviticus the 23rd chapter. He was in a hurry to get to Jerusalem because at that time, three times a year, all the males had to appear in Jerusalem. But now, turn over. They have an exhibit. Because again, we saw that Jesus, the early Christians, Paul, they all observed the 7th-day Sabbath. So we want to see, how did this modern day Christianity come into play? Where people are now observing Sunday as God's Sabbath, which is not. God, it never changed. Read where it says Encyclopedia Britannica Sunday. Go ahead.
Encyclopedia Britannica Sunday. The practice of Christians gathering together for worship on Sunday dates back to apostolic time.
And we know that that's incorrect because we saw what Paul and them were doing. Go ahead.
But details of the actual development of the custom are not clear.
But we're going to find out how this came into being, this custom or this tradition. Because all this is a tradition of man. Drop down to where it says the Emperor Constantine. Go ahead.
The Emperor Constantine, a convert to Christianity.
What did he do?
Introduced the first civil legislation concerning Sunday in 321.
Go ahead.
When he decreed that all work should cease on Sunday. Except that farmers could work if necessary. This law, aimed at providing time for worship, was followed later in the same century and in subsequent centuries by further restrictions on Sunday activity.
We see that it was Roman Emperor Constantine that decreed that Sunday was going to be the official day of worship. He did that in 321 AD, some 300 years after the death of Jesus. And mind you, Constantine was a sun worshiper. Even the name Sunday comes from a pagan holiday. It is the worship of the conquering sun. Look at MSN and Cardia Sunday. Look at what they have to say concerning this day. Go ahead.
MSN and Carta's Sunday. First day of the week. Its English name and its German name, Sonntag, are derived from the Latin dies solis.
Go ahead.
Sun's day.
Again, and Roman Emperor Constantine was simply a sun worshiper. Go ahead.
The name of a pagan Roman holiday.
And that's where the